as close to the cabin as she could. Turning off the engine, she was immediately immersed in a deep mountain silence. The miles still raced in her veins. Her clothes clung, and the car seat was littered with empty water bottles and candy wrappers. The stale air reminded her of hospital rooms. She lowered the window enough to let the fresh air awaken her after the long journey. The rain sprinkled in, and she lifted her face to it, tasting its cool sweetness. Mia looked again to the cabin. It lurked, isolated and foreboding, under the canopy of trees and mist. The woods seemed to close in around her. She felt a shiver of loneliness. But hadn't she wanted a faraway, secluded place? A sanctuary? Rolling up the window, she cast a worried glance at the clock on the dashboard. It was 6:30. Belle had told her she would pick up supplies and meet her at the cabin no later than 7. There was nowhere else to go. The cabin was locked, and the rain was coming down in sheets. She was trapped in this car, in this wilderness, to wait as the night closed in around her. Relentless rain coursed tracks down her foggy window, mirroring the tears flowing down her cheeks. Mia brought her hands to her face and wondered how she got to this place. It had all begun with fly fishing. She'd never had any interest in the sport. She was a public relations director for the Spoleto Arts Festival in Charleston. Though she lived by the ocean and mountains, she didn't have any connection to either. Her idea of a good time was drinks and dinner at a restaurant with friends. If she went on a boat, it was docked for a party. A trip to the mountains meant a few days at a ski lodge. Nonetheless, her sister Madeline had signed her up for a 3-day fly fishing retreat designed especially for breast cancer survivors. Casting for Recovery provided spiritual and physical therapy, and Madeline believed Mia needed both. So that spring, Mia had driven hours from her home in Charleston to the Casting for Recovery retreat in the foothills of North Carolina. She'd agreed to go only to keep Madeline from nagging. Some of the women at the retreat were still early in their treatments. Others were 10, 20, or more years post-diagnosis. At 38 years old, Mia was the youngest. She was reticent at first, but Belle would not allow her to remain aloof. Belle Carson was their fly fishing guide and the leader of the retreat. Belle was a tall, straight-talking, sensitive, and big-hearted woman who had chucked an academic career at the University of Virginia to move to Asheville, North Carolina, and open her own fly fishing business. Belle gently coaxed Mia out of her isolation into group discussions and taught her how to cast a dry fly. Mia was drawn into the group by force of the women's brutal honesty and their wise understanding. It was an intense 3 days that felt like 3 weeks, so much had transpired. They laughed, they cried, they were sister survivors. By the end of the retreat, she joined their feminine solidarity, formed by a shared history. But it was in the river that Mia felt that first glimmer of life, since the shock of her diagnosis had left her heart as numb as the white scar on her chest. Belle Carson had taught her how to cast a thin line from a rod onto the shallow waters of the Davidson River. To her amazement, she found hope rising in thin wisps of speckled silver. She might not have believed in fairy tales, but she believed in that spark of life she felt at the other end of the line. Eager to share her new excitement with her husband, she'd hugged the women farewell and drove back a day early to Charleston. Closing her eyes, Mia saw again the lurid image of her husband and that unknown woman lying on her marriage bed. She'd stumbled down the stairs, climbed back into her car, and started to drive, her eyes blind and her mind numb. Mia Landan of 2 years ago would have stood her ground and confronted them. Then she was confident in her career, her beauty, herself. That Mia would not have run to the mountains with her tail between her legs. But 2 years ago, Mia had not yet found the lump in her breast. The wheels that hummed beneath her on the highway, the green road signs passed in a blur as she put miles between herself and her husband's infidelity. She'd driven for 45 minutes before she realized she didn't know where she was. When at last she focused on the signs, she saw she was on Interstate 26. Her instincts were acting as her compass, guiding her north, back to the mountains where she'd felt safe. By the time she'd returned to the retreat, the sun had lowered far to the west, and the placid water of the lake had darkened.